Reactions Matter by David W. Searcy, Jr. Please like, subscribe, comment, and share the video. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the content.
What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to the channel. I hope you're having a beautiful Christmas weekend, I guess. It is Sunday, the day before Christmas. And it is snowing here in Colorado. Do you want to see? I'll show you. Look. It's freaking beautiful. So we're back here to check out some Albert Einstein's last words that shocked the whole world. I did that right? Yeah, that right. All right. Let's get into this. Oh, it already looks like we're running slow.
Albert Einstein was an outstanding scientist and thinker whose writings forever changed our understanding of the universe. His brilliance and intellect made him a world-famous person with his own oddities and peculiarities. This is Infinity, and today you'll learn about Einstein's last words that shocked the whole world. Let's go! But first, let's get to know Albert a little better. Like any other biography, the story of Albert Einstein begins with childhood. The great scientist was born on March 14, 1879 in southwestern Germany. A couple weeks after that, his family moved to Munich, where young Albert lived his childhood in the company of his sister. Few people know, but his father made a huge contribution to the future of science back then, giving the little boy a compass. As an adult, Einstein recalled that moment many times and said that it was it that led him to important and intriguing thoughts that made him study science more seriously in the future. Insanely deep and indelible impressions was made on him by the fact that the arrow always pointed to the North Magnetic Pole regardless of where the compass was turned. This is what gave him the start in his study of physics. But don't rush to think that everything was easy for Albert. He wasn't a prodigy like many other genius scientists. Rather, on the contrary, the boy didn't stand out in any way. He didn't even speak in full sentences until he was 5. For obvious reasons, his parents were concerned, but by the time it was time to go to school, Einstein began to talk clearly. One would think that the boy went to school and discovered the world of knowledge, as it happens in fairy tales, but it was not the case. Einstein hated school because everything there depended solely on rote learning. No imagination, no adaptation to conditions, and no will of the mind. Eventually, at the age of 15, the boy dropped out of school and gave up his German citizenship. For several years, he belonged to no country, preferring to be a citizen of the world. And when he eventually became a citizen again, he became a Swiss. He moved to Switzerland and tried to enter the institute, but it wasn't so easy for him. Everything was ruined by the lack of knowledge of the language. Albert was rejected, and he returned to high school, which he graduated flawlessly. With an excellent certificate, the boy was automatically enrolled in the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, where he initially failed the entrance exam. But with one more attempt, he's still enrolled in a 4-year program of study in mathematics and physics. It was at this institute that Albert met his future wife, Mileva Marique. Here's an interesting fact. Studying Albert's detailed biography after his death, it turned out that he and Mileva had a child out of wedlock, whom they did not tell anyone about. Judging by the correspondence of the two lovers, the girl was born in 1902, a year before their wedding. And already at the wedding, she was not there. It was still unknown what happened to her. Perhaps the couple gave her to their parents for upbringing or gave her to a new family ready for a child. After the wedding, Einstein had 2 official children, 2 boys. And so it was already 1905. It's this year that's considered the year of Albert's miracles. During this period, the scientist wrote 4 articles to a German scientific journal that changed the way we see the universe today. The first was the theory of light. Scientists used to believe that light was a wave. However, the fact that this very light can create an electric current puzzled everybody. Einstein hypothesized that light actually consists of a stream of particles called photons, and these photons can knock an electron off an atom, creating a current. This theory was later confirmed, and the phenomenon was called the photoelectric effect. Unknown theory. Einstein also discovered another theory which he did not publicize until the end of his life. Archivists discovered it by accident and believed that Albert simply lost the paper with calculations. However, there were those who were convinced that these were the last words of the genius. The discovered manuscript shows that Albert Einstein was thinking about an alternative theory of the evolution of the universe. It states that the universe was not born in the Big Bang, but is expanding continuously and eternally. It's impossible to treat these calculations objectively because everyone knew that Albert strongly disliked the Big Bang theory, so he was probably trying to find an alternative solution. A recently discovered document shows that Einstein described this idea much earlier than another scientist who made it public about 20 years later. Researchers believe the manuscript was made during a trip to California in 1931. It was preserved in Albert Einstein's archive in Jerusalem and was still freely available, but it was mistakenly attributed to another of Einstein's papers. Einstein's brain was stolen after his death. Just imagine such a statement. Is it possible to perceive it adequately?
Eat the brain?
It's nonsense, isn't it? Despite first impressions, it's true. The story of the great scientist's brain is considered almost a detective story. The fact is that the pathologist, Thomas Harvey, who performed an autopsy on the scientist's body, decided that the brain of such a genius should never be destroyed. It must be studied. He extracted it from the head and kept it. He took photos from different sides and then divided the brain into 240 small particles, which he sent to leading American researchers for examination. The man strongly wanted to know what features there are in the brain of this brilliant man. Soon, information about the stealing leaked into society, and Albert's relatives immediately expressed a desire to get their relative's brain back. But Harvey answered them with a refusal. After that, he lost his job and his medical license, and his wife left him. For the rest of his life, he worked as a factory laborer. Was it worth it? After all, even with the results of the tests, nothing supernatural was found. It's likely that the pathologist was simply a fan of Einstein, and it ruined his life.
A fan of Einstein? You steal his brain? I mean, at least you could have done was try to get the knowledge out of it.
The existence of atoms. Albert observed what appeared to be the random movement of particles in water and concluded that the phenomenon was not so random, assuming that the water was actually made up of invisible atoms that caused the particles to oscillate. This interaction was named Brownian motion, after the botanist Robert Brown, who had observed the phenomenon earlier. However, Albert Einstein's most famous theory at that time was the special theory of relativity. To describe it in the simplest terms, it says the following: if events are separated in space, it's impossible to say whether they occurred at the same time. For example, events A, B, and C occur at the same time, but depending on the point of observation, it will look like they occur in a different order. Transferring this to our world, here's a great example. Two people hold a rock in their hands at the same level and then let go of them at the same moment. To an observer, it will seem that the one who is closer to them did it earlier, because at near light speeds, time slows down, and the world we see around us is nothing but a constant reflection of light from different surfaces. This was only proven experimentally in 1955. E equals mc squared. Every person who went to school knows it by heart. It's Einstein's fourth theory, which gave us all an equation showing that energy is equal to the mass of a body times the speed of light squared. If you're still having trouble understanding this, don't worry. Einstein himself once said, "Do not worry about your difficulties in mathematics. I assure you that mine are greater." However, it seems to me that it was his personal life that was the most difficult for Einstein. It was a real mess all the time. The scientist became more and more famous, which is why he rarely appeared at home. His wife, who was also a mathematician and physicist, abandoned her ambitions in favor of caring for children, but very soon she was betrayed. Albert cheated on her with his first love, writing her a frank letter and expressing a desire to meet. However, the second girl did not become the last for Albert. The next in his love queue was his own cousin. In 1919, the scientist married her and they lived together for the next few years, but he soon cheated on her too. Meanwhile, by the way, Albert and his first wife had an arrangement. If Einstein ever received the Nobel Prize, he would give the money from it to his now ex-wife. And so it happened. The scientist received the prize for his services to theoretical physics, and especially for his discovery of the law of the photoelectric effect, and gave it to Marique. General relativity. And now you're thinking, why are we going back to this theory? No, that was special relativity, and this is general relativity. The first one didn't take into account the existence of gravity, and that didn't give Einstein any peace. For 10 years, he fought over this problem because he came up with his general theory of relativity, which put the whole puzzle together. Relying on it, the great scientist made the statement that an object with high mass, such as the sun, causes curvature of space around itself. Earth is affected by the curvature and rolls around the sun like a ball rolling in a bowl. In other words, in an orbit. Also, this theory suggested that light from another star would be warped by the sun's gravity. Funnily enough, this information gave almost nothing to ordinary people, but the discovery of the theory was celebrated as if people had controlled fire for the first time. It was after this breakthrough theory that Albert became incredibly famous and popular. He began to travel abroad, giving lectures and publish his first impression after visiting certain countries. At the same time, entry to his native Germany was closed to him because, as a Jew, Einstein simply could not return there. By that time, the Jews in Germany began to be persecuted and exterminated. Albert chose the United States as his new home. There he took a position as a lecturer at the Institute of Advanced Study in Princeton, where he lived for the rest of his life. Life in America, which dropped the atomic bombs on Japan, the formula E equals mc squared. No thoughts arise in your head? Yes, of course, against the background of everything that happened in the following years, many became convinced that Albert Einstein participated in the creation of atomic bombs. But in fact, it was not the case. As the scientist himself stated, his only involvement was in a letter to President Roosevelt. In it, he said that he feared that the Germans would be the first to develop this powerful weapon. Albert emphasized the need for major experiments to study the feasibility of such a weapon. There was no question of any practical work on this project. Albert remained on the sidelines. Myth or truth? This is the question that may arise in the minds of many of you when you read different statements on the subject of the famous scientist. A lot of things were written about him, and some of them were actually true. For example, the fact that Einstein was offered to become the president of Israel is true. When the first president of established Israel passed away in 1952, Prime Minister...
He was born in 1879. Which is like 96 years. So he's 96 years older than me.
David Ben-Gurion offered Einstein an honorary position. The scientist responded by calling that country's ambassador in Washington and saying, "I am deeply moved by the offer from our state of Israel to serve as president, and at once saddened and ashamed that I cannot accept it. All my life I have dealt with objective matters. Hence, I lack both the natural aptitude and the experience to deal properly with people and to exercise official functions. Now, let's move on to the more amusing
pretty
yet
good.
persistent
At least he was
myths
honest
about
with
the
it, huh?
physicist's life. For example, it was said that he never wore socks. And it's true. Even on the most solemn occasions, I got away without wearing socks and hid the lack of civilization in high boots, the scientist wrote to his wife. By his own admission, in his younger years, he was annoyed that his big toes were constantly making holes in his socks. So Einstein preferred to do without this piece of clothing. Do you remember that most famous photo of the scientist with his tongue sticking out? Did you think it was photoshopped or some kind of fake? Well, it's not. It's a real photo of Albert showing his tongue sticking out of fatigue. The photo was taken in 1951. The exhausted scientist was leaving another meeting. He had already gotten into the car, but he continued to be pestered by photojournalists, ignoring the requests. Enough, enough! In response to another, smile. The irritated genius stuck out his tongue. And this was immediately caught on camera. Einstein really liked the photo portrait cut out of this group shot. It said that he even sent it to his friends as a postcard.
Haha. Oh, shit. Albert Einstein. He's a man of constant sorrow.
Entering a trance by playing the violin. Yeah, he's had that in his life. Being a genius isn't easy. It's important to find working methods to maintain concentration. Some people smoke a pipe, which Albert also did quite often, and some play the violin. You'll be surprised, but the famous scientist found time to learn to play this instrument. He did it for a reason. Albert noticed that when he has a violin in his hands and plays something, his body seems to enter a trance. At that moment, Einstein did not obey even himself, and his mind was not limited by anyone and anything. The man said that if he were not a scientist, he would probably just play the violin, and it's quite possible that this very playing would develop into something more. Remember the story about Einstein's brain being stolen? In those days, scientists were unable to extract any information from the brain of the deceased, as the technology was quite primitive. Nowadays, however, scientific progress has come a long way, so much so that scientists have even learned what exactly happens to the human brain a moment before and after death. In February of this year, scientists made a huge breakthrough. They learned for the first time what happens to the brain at the moment of death. A research team of scientists from China, Estonia, Canada, and the United States recorded the brain waves of an 87-year-old patient with epilepsy using an electroencephalograph. A special cap with electrodes on the patient's head allowed them to monitor what was happening in the brain and record brain activity during epileptic seizures. However, during the monitoring, the patient suddenly had a heart attack and died. Thus, the researchers accidentally managed to record 15 minutes of brain activity at the time of death. Scientists were most interested in the 30 seconds before and after death. That is, when the patient's heart stopped beating. They found that the gamma rhythms of the brain were strongly activated in the background of the other indicators. Normally, gamma rhythms are activated during such processes as dreaming, meditation, and remembering. This means that 30 seconds before death, the brain is trying to remember important life events. Now it's clear what the whole life flashed before one's eyes means. Dying people do indeed seem to review the highlights of their life before falling asleep for eternity. And given that the processes occurring in the brain before death are similar to those that the brain processes in sleep, it means that the process of dying is similar to falling asleep. Also, as part of an unexpected discovery, scientists found out that the brain can conduct coordinated activity even after the heart stops pumping blood through its vessels. Although the scientist's discovery can be called a breakthrough, it's not yet safe to say that the 87-year-old patient felt exactly the same way as the other dying patients before he died. First, the study's conclusions rely on measuring only one person's brain activity, and second, the patient suffered from epilepsy, which means that his brain function was different from that of healthy people. By the way, as part of the study, Scientists remembered that changes in gamma rhythms in the brain at the time of death had previously been found in rats. So, such indicator as changes in gamma rhythms exactly indicates as imminent death. As we've already found out, dying is about the same as falling asleep. At least that's what the process in the brain tells us. Nevertheless, the feelings of death can be different. Some people who have experienced clinical death have said that death is indeed similar to sleep or to fainting. According to them, the sensation of temporary unconsciousness is not different from eternal unconsciousness. People who experienced clinical death describe their experience in the same way as those who lost consciousness. Other people reported experiencing near-death experiences. They said they felt exiting the physical body and were visited by mystical visions. Statistically, 10% of people who have experienced clinical death have experienced something similar. So even in real death, quite a few people have near-death experiences. According to scientists, near-death experiences and visions are related to changes in the brain in the face of a lack of oxygen, glucose, and cell death. Researchers have also found a link between near-death experiences and the REM sleep cycle, during which the brain works as actively as it does during wakefulness. Again, we go back to the question of dreams, which means that death and sleep are, in any case, similar and related. In addition, during scientific experiments, scientists have found out that before death and at its moment, a human not only sees something but also feels a strange smell. According to some reports, it's the smell of putrescine, which is referred to cadaveric poisons. This sweet, putrid odor appears as a result of the decomposition of protein in the human body, and this odor can begin to be felt 24 hours before death. The human body has a special olfactory receptor which is tuned to this smell. It's awakened on the eve of death and causes the person to pay attention to the body to help them accept the fact of his impending demise. Not every person feels peace and a sense of sinking into sleep when dying. After all, it all depends on what exactly caused death, and some causes of death can make the sensation of dying very painful. For example, it's painful to die from a gunshot wound, even if the bullet was in the head. It all depends on what part of the brain the bullet hit. Under certain conditions, death from a bullet is instantaneous, and a person has no time to feel anything. In other situations, a person feels a sharp jolt, then some heat in the body, and then severe pain which can last for several minutes. It hurts to die from a fall from a height. In the first moment after the fall, a person experiences intense pain from the impact, after which they die. Yet, for the most part, studies by scientists and the experience of people who have experienced clinical death show that at the moment of death, a person experiences euphoria. A study conducted on rats in 2011 showed that at the moment of death, their brains had a threefold increase in the levels of serotonin, a chemical called the happiness hormone. Scientists speculate that the same processes may occur in the human brain in the last moments before and at the moment of death itself, which is why many of the deceased have a calm and peaceful facial expression, as if they were just sleeping. According to scientists, just before death, the amount of hormones and chemicals associated with stress increases in the body. These same chemicals are present in sick people's bodies and cause inflammation. Given this change in chemicals in the body, we can assume that just before death, there may indeed be a powerful release of endorphins, which are responsible for pleasure and feelings of happiness. In that case, it can sometimes